Hi everyone, welcome to the learning and memorization video for the book The Obstacle is a Way, which is included in your mentor box. I'm here with actually the author of the book, Ryan Holiday, in his office in Texas, and his office is just covered with books all around. So, the idea is pretty simple. We're gonna, throughout this video, first Ryan is gonna actually talk about his book really briefly, give you guys a summary, but then of the cheat sheet. But then I want you guys to find the cheat sheet and the memorization booklet in your mentor box. And as you're watching this video, pause the video whenever needed to fill out the exercise. The idea is pretty simple. We are combining the 4 methods of learning: reading, visual and auditory, as well as doing, kinesthetic, which is your booklet, together so that you guys not only learn the concepts really quickly, but also you're able to remember them and memorize them very effectively. And for this book, actually, Ryan worked with us on the memorization booklet. So pay attention. It's very interesting what we're about to do here. So now let's talk about the book a little bit. So Ryan has written multiple best-selling books, and this is one of my favorite books. And do you want to talk about it for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So basically, The Obstacle is the Way is based on a single exercise from the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Mm-hmm. He was also known as a Stoic philosopher. What he says, he would sit down every night, sort of like you guys are going to be doing in these journals and workbooks you have, and he would write in this journal notes to himself. And one of the things that he wrote to himself, sometime between the year 100 and 200 AD, he writes this note to himself. He says, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And really what he means is that everything that happens to us in life can either be seen as an obstacle or it can be seen as an opportunity. And if you see it as an opportunity, it's therefore always something that you can use to move forward. And so that's what the entire book is about. I sort of define Stoic philosophy as this idea of we don't control what happens to us, but we always control how we respond. And so the book, it came out of my love of this Stoic philosophy, but then it ended up becoming really popular with entrepreneurs, became popular in professional sports, it became popular in the military. So I'm really excited to sort of dig into it. I guess we'll go over the cheat sheet. I'll sort of, it's interesting. You write a book, and a book is about ideas, but oftentimes the ideas can be expressed really simply, and then you need examples to illustrate it. But there's a single quote from Marcus Aurelius as well that I think illustrates that is in and of itself sort of a cheat sheet for Stoic philosophy in the book. Here, I'll read it to you so I don't mess it up. There we go. So Marcus, he says, and you can see it's right here, I marked it.
What page?
It's on page 9. He's saying, objective judgment now at this very moment, unselfish action now at this very moment, willing acceptance now at this very moment of all external events, that's all you need. And so when I say that that's a cheat sheet for the book and for the philosophy, the book is organized into 3 parts, right? It's the discipline of perception, the discipline of action, and the discipline of will. So that's objective judgment, then unselfish action, and then willing acceptance. So those are the 3 sort of parts 1, 2, and 3 of the book, and we're just going to go through those really quickly.
Yeah.
So perception is how you look at the world, right? How you see the world often determines what you're going to be able to do in that world. If you tell yourself that everything is hopeless, that you've been screwed over, that it's impossible to recover from that, I'm not saying that this is the law of attraction and what you wish will become true, but if you don't think you can do something, you probably can't do that thing.
And I sometimes refer to that as reframing the question or the obstacle. Just that simple act of looking at the problem or the question and reframing it helps a lot.
And because what oftentimes we do is we look at a problem and it's bad, and then we make it worse by how we tell ourselves that we can't do anything about it, that's totally unfair, that we're overwhelmed. Those are sort of unhelpful ways of framing it. Whereas if you frame it as, hey, I'm going to learn from this, or hey, this is an opportunity to practice patience, or hey, everyone was screwed over by this, and
Right.
so by responding quicker and with more discipline than everyone
I'll
else,
be ahead of
I'll be
everyone.
ahead.
Yep.
And so that's really what this section of the book is about. How you look at things objectively, how you look at things with sort of clarity and some insight, how you focus on what you can control in a given situation versus what you don't control. So one of the things the Stoics say a lot is basically nothing can make you feel a certain way. That's your choice. So my wife says this to me. I'll be like, "You're being frustrating," and she'll say, "I can't make you frustrated. That's your choice, right?" Another person's actions are apart from you. They're totally independent. What we choose is what that says to us. So if you
External stimuli versus our reaction to that external factor.
Totally. Like if you call me an asshole, I
Right.
choose whether that's offensive to me or not.
Right.
I choose even whether I acknowledge it or not. So we have a lot of choice about our perceptions that we sort of it's an incredible power, but we kind of relinquish it a lot of the time.
Right. And we let outside factors dictate what's happening inside us.
Yeah, and I would say that that's most clear with our emotions. So when we freak out about something, when we get scared, when we get anxious, these are really unhelpful emotions that are distracting us from what we're trying to do. So it's not that a Stoic is emotionless. Nassim Taleb, he says that they've domesticated their emotions. So it's like, I'm an anxious person. I know that. So when I start to feel that anxiety, I recognize it and I say, "Hey, I'm feeling anxious. Let me make sure I don't make any decisions or take any actions based on that."
Yeah.
Right. So the first step is just like how we look at things, and that's why the discipline of perception is so powerful. You know, Steve Jobs was famous for this idea of his reality distortion field, and in some aspects that's bad, right? If you're not living in reality, that's very unstoic, but he was also pushing past the limitation. So someone would say, "That's impossible. We can't possibly make this in that amount of time," and he would say, "I'm not sure that that's true. Like, let's do it anyway."
Yeah.
And so that forcefulness allowed that control of his perception, not necessarily seeing everything the same way, in the same limited fashion that everyone else saw it, gave him the ability to sort of push past what everyone else thought was possible.
Yep. That's interesting. Part two.
Yeah, let's do part two. So part two is, what do you actually do with these perceptions? Again, you know, if you don't think that something's possible, or if you don't think you can do something, you probably can't. But just because you think you can do something doesn't mean you can't.
Yes.
You have to take successful, what the Stoics would say, unselfish, sort of disciplined action. So obviously the only way to turn theory into reality is by taking action. We can get so caught up about thinking about everything, planning everything, that at a certain point you just have to get off your ass and do it.
Do it.
Right. And so I think it's essential that even when we're reading or we're learning, that we're always keeping an eye on, like, what am I going to do with this information? How am I going to apply it in my life? And then I think the other thing that prevents us from taking action is often a fear of failure, right? And this is where perception and action are linked, right? If you think that failure is bad, you're going to avoid it. If you see failure as a chance to learn, you're not going to be that afraid of it, and you're going to get something more out of it each time that it happens. So you see entrepreneurs, they're not afraid to fail. In fact, they see failure as feedback. And if you can incorporate that idea into your life, you become much more resilient.
Yeah, and we have exercises in the booklet to go through that point. I think it's a really important point, and I see entrepreneurs going through that all the time.
Yeah, and I think the Stoics are also talking about, you know, not getting, Marcus says to himself, don't go around expecting Plato's Republic. You know, he's saying, don't expect things to work according to your plans. I think Eisenhower said, you know, he's like, plans are meaningless, but planning is everything.
Right.
So it's the process of planning, but then being adaptive and resilient when those plans don't work out, and sort of moving forward, always sort of leading with your stick forward, you know, taking that action, and then being flexible. And it's like, I don't care how pretty it looks, I care that it works.
Right.
And that too is a very Stoic idea. And then the third part would be the discipline of the will. It's similar to willpower, but I think it's something greater than that. So what do you do when you do experience failure, or when you do experience adversity? How do you persevere through that? I make a distinction in the book, and the Stoics do this too, between persistence, which is sort of sticking at it, and perseverance, which is like enduring all of the difficulties of life, right? So I think that's a big part of it. And you know, the Stoics had this idea, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more later, but this idea of amor fati, which is a Latin phrase. It means a love of fate, which means you just embrace everything that happens to you. And that's what Marcus is saying, the impediment to action advances action. There's nothing bad that can happen to you or to the Stoic. The Stoics felt like, in the same way that when a fire is blocked, that whatever is blocking the fire becomes fuel for the fire.
Right.
And that's the attitude that you want to take towards your problems, to your work. You know, someone is being rude to you. Is that preventing you? Is that making you miserable? Or is it actually something that's fueling you? Now you're trying to win this person over, or you're trying to not let this person get to you. You know, you're having financial problems. Is this something that's making you miserable and depressed, or is this something that's making you get a little bit more creative, or it's forcing you to re-examine some of your choices and priorities? So it's this idea that I'm constantly fueled by everything that happens to me, and I'm using it as a way to move forward and move further than maybe I otherwise would have gone. That you can see is an attitude that is going to take you places, because there's nothing to prevent you from going forward.
Right. Persistence versus perseverance.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So great. So now we want to. We are not gonna. I think this booklet has about 30 exercises, and we are not gonna go through all of them, but we are gonna handpick a few that Ryan likes and a couple that I like, and we are gonna go through a bunch of them. Again, the Roman emperor wrote in his booklet. I actually ask you guys to take the time to.
I think I have a copy of it here.
of the
yeah. So this is his meditations, and he would write every day these sort of little thoughts. It was what the Stoics called or what people have since called a commonplace book.
Right.
Like, these are my notes. These are the things that I'm recording.
Right.
That I'm thinking about and working through. It's a great way to think.
Exactly, and that's why we include these booklets. We are prompting you with a question, with a thought, with an exercise, and it's important to not just think through them, but actually pick up a pen and write down the answers. And you know, whenever you need to pause the video and write down, if you know you don't have the answer right away, it's okay. Just pause the video, walk away, maybe tomorrow, later that day. But it's important to actually write it down. The act of writing down is the closest thing to actually implementing something in real life. So it actually helps you internalize, personalize the concept so that it's actually useful and it sticks with you.
Yeah, I mean, the quote that I based this book on, you know, the impediment to action advances action, I wrote that quote down probably in 2007 on a note card, and it became a book in 2014. So 7 years later.
Down with hand.
By hand on a 4x6.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's why it's important to pick up the pen and actually write down these exercises. Watch the videos, read the cheat sheet, but don't forget to actually write down the answer to the exercises. Okay? Okay, let's get started. Ryan, why don't you open up by exercise number 1.
Yeah, so the discipline of perception, which we talked a little bit about earlier, the story I tell in the book is the story of John D. Rockefeller, who's just sort of, in addition to being one of the richest men who ever lived, he was responsible for, or he was well known for his sort of calm demeanor, his ability, even in the midst of crisis, to sort of never lose his head. And you know, early in his life, he experienced the panic of 1857, which is one of the worst financial crises in American history. And he actually, later, he looks back at this and he defines it as his apprenticeship. And he says he's actually grateful that this happened. And his sort of perception was, actually, I'm going to learn from the market at its absolute worst. This is going to be an educational opportunity for me. And there's some other examples I talked about in the book. At one point, he was given a $500,000 check to go invest in these oil fields. And he gets there, and this is a life-changing opportunity for him, but he doesn't think that the investment is good enough, and he returns the money to the investors. He had enough discipline to say, even though this would be really good for me, even though I want this more than anything in the world, I can see objectively enough that this isn't a good enough opportunity. I'm going to hold back. So that it's perception, but discipline is I think the critical word there. How can you be in control of how you see things to such a degree that you can see a bad thing and go, actually, this is good for me? and you can see a good thing and go, actually, if I rush into this, it's going to be bad for me.
I see.
And that sense of control is what we want to cultivate. And it's what allowed him to take advantage of all these crises throughout the course of his career, even up until 1929, one of the worst market crashes in history, and not lose his head when he became extraordinarily successful as well.
Okay, so the exercise here is let's say we use the example of a stock market crash. Let's say you lose your 401k, or let's say you lose a lot of the value of your stock market portfolio. What is your reaction? How would you react compared to Rockefeller, for example? So,
well, I think most of us freak out, right? That's
Right.
what we do, and it should be said that doesn't do it. Freaking out doesn't get you your money back,
Not at all.
right?
Right.
So first you have to ask yourself, how did I put myself in a position to let this happen? That's like the first part, and then you go, okay, could this be a very costly education
Right.
for me? I think there's a famous story about one of the founders of Intel where some employee loses like $10 million, and the employee comes in and says, "You're going to fire me, right?" And he says, "Why would I fire you? I just spent $10 million investing in you, right, or in your education." And so
Right.
that, I think at the very least you look at a crisis like that and you say, what was I doing wrong?
Right.
And what did I learn from this that other people maybe didn't learn? And that's going to be an advantage going forward.
Right. And if stock market is something that you don't relate to, it's fine. Just think of something that has either gone really wrong in your life recently or something that can potentially go wrong.
Right.
And then literally write down your reaction. Is it going to be, are you going to be a deer in the headlights, or you're going to actually, learn something from it? What would you learn from it? So, we use the example of the stock market because a lot of people have stock market portfolios, but if you don't, I mean, maybe you lose your house, maybe, you crash your
get
car.
dumped.
You get dumped by your significant other. A lot of things can go wrong in life, and the question is, think of one of those and then think what you can actually gain from that event that went wrong.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a good exercise. Let's jump to exercise number 3 now.
Yeah, so this is about steadying your nerves, which I think is related to the discipline of perception, because like we said, a lot of times we freak out about stuff because it's scary or it catches us by surprise, or we're just not used to it. It's like most people can't handle yelling because it's so unfamiliar to them. Yeah, and it sort of, they are like a deer in the headlights.
Right.
It shocks them. They have that sort of hormonal response. And then they react. Now they're not reacting how they want to react. They're reacting defined by this sort of stimulus. And so what I think you see with really great people is that they've managed to steady that nerve to a point where they're not caught off guard like that. Tell the story of Ulysses S. Grant. He's sitting not unlike this for a photo during the Civil War, and somebody broke a skylight above his head, and this glass comes falling down, the shattered glass. Any one of those shards could have killed him, and he just sits there and he sort of dusts off his hat after, and then he says, like, let's continue with the photo, because he'd gotten to a point as a soldier that he wasn't scared by sort of sudden noises or changes. And so I think you want to think about some of those things in advance. As we say in the exercise, you're in the middle of a huge project and somebody quits. Explain how you're going to keep your nerve. What are you going to do about that? There's a Stoic exercise called meditatio malorum, and it's basically what we're talking about here. It means premeditation of evils. How can you think about in advance some of these worst case scenarios? Getting dumped, losing your house, your car being repossessed, getting fired, and then you can actually walk yourself through what your reaction would be
before it even happens.
So if it does happen,
then
you're great.
Yeah, that's actually a great exercise. So again, we give you an exercise of a project. You're the lead of the project. If that relates to you, write down, pause the video, and write down the answer to it. If not, come up with a similar situation in your life where something can go wrong, and just pause the video and literally write down your reaction to it. And like Ryan said, premeditate that situation ahead of time, and then when it happens, you're not stuck anymore. You know what to do, and that's kind of like a that's a reaction that once you build, that's one how you know how you can deal effectively with all these things that can go wrong in your life.
And if it doesn't happen, that's even
Great.
better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So next exercise, I'm gonna do this one. Practice objectivity. So this is actually an interesting thing. So our animal brain tries to squeeze the distance between perception and action.
Yes.
And this is something that I tell people all the time, that fear actually has a physiological reason for its existence. The goal of fear is to alert you. That's why fear existed to begin with, just to bring the danger to your attention and get you ready for that danger. But the usefulness of fear is like for a millisecond, just for you to recognize the danger.
Yes.
Anything after that fear is actually counterproductive. And the example that I use, and I see this all the time, physical danger or psychological issues, life issues. Fear kicks in, and that's useful. But then for right after that, they continue to be fearful, and that's how they get stuck in the situation. And there's a concept in motorcycle riding. Have you heard of the concept target fixation?
No.
So it actually came out. The term was coined during World War II, where pilots who were trying to hit a target and they couldn't hit the target and got too close to the target, they would, instead of going around it, they would hit it because they were looking at it.
Sure.
Now, in motorcycle riding, actually target fixation is just Google target fixation and watch the YouTube videos is #1 cause of crashes for motorcycle riders. Is because I'm going to give you an example, and you can look at the YouTube videos of this. So you're riding on a motorcycle, and the car in front of you comes to a sudden stop, and you don't have enough time to stop.
Right.
But there's enough time to, swerve around it, just go left or right. But what happens is that the fear of hitting the car in front of you, your eyes are literally looking at the back of the car in front of you, and guess what? If you look at the target like that, the obstacle like that, you actually end up hitting it.
Right.
And there are all these videos of people with GoPros on their helmets, and they had plenty of time to maneuver, but they just hit the target head on. And that's one of the things that I tell people is that, in your life, whether it's a physical danger or it's actually, something in your life that goes wrong, use fear for a millisecond to be aware. Acknowledge let fear do its job. It just alerts you of the danger.
Right.
But then right after that, you have to look, the solution in all those situations is that to turn your head and look at, am I going to the left of the obstacle, to the right of the obstacle, to the top or bottom or whatever, I'm going to make a U-turn. The goal is you literally have to turn your head away and look at where you're going now.
Right.
And if you look at, again, in motorcycle riding, if you see really good motorcycle riders, people who are racing, regardless of the situation, they're never looking at the problem. They acknowledge the problem, but then they're always looking at their head is literally turned towards what they're going. So that's, in entrepreneurship, I have gone through this quite a few times. You end up in a situation, your business, you feel like, okay, I'm not going to make the payroll.
Right.
My business is not good. But then that fear, don't let that fear paralyze you. You should immediately be thinking about the solutions for it, not at the problem.
Yeah, there's a line from Chris Hadfield, who's a Canadian astronaut. He was saying, "There's no problem so bad that you can't make it worse."
Right.
And he's saying that in space because what it's like, you're in a spaceship and all of a sudden these warning lights start going off. Well, if you just start reacting, that's not going to work. And if you freeze up, that's not going to work. You have to calm yourself and go, okay, what can I do here? What are my options? And then sort of methodically go through them. You can't, if your boss, as we say in the exercise, your boss is yelling at you, you're afraid and nervous. If that becomes a cycle where you're scared and then you're worried how you're going to get out of it, and then you're worried if you're going to lose your job, you're not going to be focused on what can I say that will calm this situation down.
Right.
How do I explain myself? What's a solution? If you can sort of get out of that, then you can do something about it. Otherwise, you'll just end up getting your ass chewed out.
Yeah, so that's a good exercise to do. your boss, and I mean it's a common exercise to think of them, in a non-work environment and see whether or not that person is still intimidating to you.
Totally.
As a matter of fact, I want to tell you that one of the main reasons that people don't do well in their jobs, in their career, is that they're intimidated by coworkers, their boss, or what people around them, and that constant fear doesn't allow. Versus, I mean, people are people. So end of the day, the only thing that is in your control is how to react to what your job, your team, your boss throws at you. One other exercise I can give you here is that think of a situation in your life that has happened recently, like in the past week or two or month or so, and then ask yourself this question: once the problem happened and I wasn't expecting it, did I just keep my eyes on the problem, or I actually looked around?
Right.
Like, did I look at solutions, or I was just, deer in the headlights looking at the problem?
And I think this relates to the next exercise, which is exercise 6, which is how do you alter your perspective and see things differently? And, he was saying, can you look at your boss in a different social setting or whatever? George Clooney, when he was an actor, he tells his story, he would go to these auditions and he was incredibly intimidated. Like, will they choose me? Why won't they choose me? Of course, I'm not going to get. It was this sort of self-fulfilling cycle. And one day he realized, hey, these people are trying to find someone. Like they're spending a lot of money. They have to, it's not as if, hey, if they don't find an actor for this role, they're not going to make the movie. It's like they have to find an actor. So if he says, can I see myself as a solution to their problem, then I'm going to go in there. I'm going to feel empowered. I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm going to know what to do better. And you want to think that the same way in your life. It seems intimidating to start a company, and then you realize, like, nobody's going around thinking, I have everything I ever wanted. I don't want any more stuff. People want lots more stuff. Right. Companies need to hire people. They have lots of stuff they're trying to do. And so if you can focus on that, you're going to be in a much better spot. What's the opportunity here? What can I do? What need can I solve for these people, rather than thinking about how scary it is for you? It's like your boss is yelling because someone's probably yelling at them, and if you can empathize with that, you can do something about it.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect example. So George Clooney, first, instead of being stuck and just looking at the problem and being frustrated, he first rephrased and reframed the problem. And then, instead of being, again, stuck, he just took action. He just changed his approach to the problem. It's like a perfect example. And the example that we use here, again, if you're in sales, you probably relate to this. Let's say you missed a big sale or a deal that you wanted to go through, and and it didn't. It hasn't. It fell through. So what do you do about it? You can just, sit down and be sad about it,
right? Or
you acknowledge it and then see if you can turn it into an opportunity. The example that we gave here was, can you think of a deal that didn't go through, like a project or something that you wanted to go through and it didn't? Is it an opportunity? Does it give you more free time?
Sure.
To even like something like being fired from your job.
Right.
Let's say you're fired from your job. Is that an opportunity to something even better and greater now that you have nothing to do? So,
I think it's interesting too. It's like if 5 minutes before you got fired, you'd quit.
Right.
You would see it as an empowering thing.
That's
right? You're like, I left this job because I didn't want to work there. But 5 minutes later, someone says, you can't work there anymore. The event is objectively the same. You don't work there anymore.
Right.
But the story you tell yourself about it determines whether you're happy about it or sad about it.
Yeah, I think this is a great exercise. I think this is one of the best exercises in this booklet is, literally I can talk to my own personal life. Every time something went horribly wrong in my life, at some point, end of the day, at that moment, it made me sad, but end of the day, I somehow benefited from it.
Retroactively, we look back on the worst things in our life and we're grateful for them.
Right.
So why not experience at least a taste of that while it's happening instead of waiting 10 years before you feel good about it?
Right. Exactly.
All right. So the next exercise is exercise 7, and it's, is it up to you? So Epictetus, who's one of the Stoic philosophers, he says, our chief task in life is to make the distinction between the things we do control and the things we don't control. Now, I tell the story of Tommy John, who's one of the greatest baseball pitchers to ever play. His sort of attitude as a player was always, look, do I have a chance? If I have a 1 in 100 chance, then it's up to me and I'm going to make it happen. If it's not, then I'm not going to worry about it. And so this is similar to what the addicts call the serenity prayer, right? The courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. And so what you want to do is, I think it can be helpful, and the exercise we talk about here is, let's run down a list of things that you don't control and the things you do control. And these are going to seem really simple, but if you go back and think about how many times they've made you upset, you'll realize that you waste a lot of time thinking about them. So it's like, look, you don't control the weather, but you do control your attitude. You do control your judgments and your perspective, but you don't necessarily control the circumstance that you might find yourself in. You determine your own determination, like how dedicated you're going to be to a given thing, but you don't determine other people's determination. You don't determine trends, but you determine how you might take advantage of a given trend. So, look, you don't control whether your flight's delayed, but you do control whether you're going to yell at the airline employee about it. And so making that distinction is really, really important.
Yep, it's actually a very interesting exercise. And if you want to, personalize this a little bit, you can even go with a particular example and then see what were the parameters in that example, and then write down in 2 columns the ones that are in your control and the ones that are not in your control. And you would see, it's interesting because frustration about things that are not in your control is literally a waste of your energy and time.
Yes.
So, and it's totally counterproductive.
Totally.
Good. Next exercise, we're going, I think, to the next section here. All right. So iteration, and I'm going to do this one. So this is exercise 14. It's about, it's interesting that you use the concept of minimum viable product. That's something that every semester, I lectured the last class of the entrepreneurship class at Berkeley.
Okay.
And one of the things I tell entrepreneurs is, if you are analyzing your product or idea this is my observation, for more than 6 months, and I've seen this many times over and over again, the chances are you never start that company.
Yeah.
So the best way to approach entrepreneurship is starting a business, but this is not just entrepreneurship, pretty much any aspect in your life, is to go at it however imperfectly. Like, you don't have to be perfect in the first try, but go at it. And then use that learning experience to iterate and iterate and iterate again and again.
Yeah, it's avoiding paralysis by analysis,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
I think people are planning this thing out intricately, and you really have no idea how it's going to go. If you planned every single step, what if on the 3rd step everything gets tossed out? A lot of that energy is going to be wasted. I still think planning is really important, but the idea is at a certain point you got to ship, and you got to be willing to respond to that feedback. So, I guess the premise of this exercise is, so many people are trying to avoid failure in advance instead of learning from the smaller failures that that come along the way and making those adjustments. And so I think, we sort of touched on this earlier, but it's like, think back to the biggest failures of your life and write them down, and then ask yourself, what do you think about those failures now? Now you grasp that they made you who you were, that you learned a lot, that they cut maybe a lot of dead weight out of your life, that they had some positive impact. So instead of going around and trying to avoid failure all the time, it's not that you should seek it out, but you should be relatively indifferent, right? You should be okay with a failure because or with learning that, hey, this thing that I tried didn't work. It's being comfortable being wrong, because you learn when you turn out to be wrong.
Yep. And this is the exercise's biggest failure. That's your personal life. In business specifically, and product launch specifically, Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, has a quote that I really like. He says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of the product you launch, you've launched too late. So basically, the idea is very simple. Minimum viable product is a little bit of a jargon, but the idea is very simple. don't sit on the project and idea and don't pull the trigger because you want to just, put everything in place. The moment you think the product or the idea is good enough,
right,
or the action that you're going to take, let's say you're even like it's not just entrepreneurship, let's say you're starting to apply for a job, you can spend a year just trying to perfect your resume before sending it to anybody, versus the best approach is spend some time, write a resume,
right,
then send it to a few people, see what kind of reaction you get, then iterate based on that. A much superior approach, and something that would win over time, versus just trying to sit in your own room and in vacuum trying to perfect things.
Quantity can create quality.
Yes, exactly.
And so
because you learn, because it's constant iterate.
Totally.
It's very simple. And again, pause the video and think of a situation in your life where this very important concept, it definitely applies to business. It definitely applies to taking on a project, a huge project even. And it can even apply to your job. If you have a project that you want to launch in your company, let's say you want to do something, launch it, convince your company to do a project. One way is to spend a lot of time working out all the details. Another way is to take the raw idea to your boss and say, this is the raw idea. Let's do a little test, or let's, start iterating on this. So, again, pause the video, think of a situation, and write down your thoughts about this.
And the next exercise we have is, I title this in praise of the flank attack.
Exercise 18.
Exercise 18. Yeah. I think one of the, connected to the idea of over planning things, is oftentimes when we're up against someone really big, or a big competitor, or a big problem, we try to tackle it head on.
Yeah.
And so because it's so hard, that's why we think we need this perfect solution. What you learn in the martial arts, for instance, is that strength never goes up against strength. Gandhi did not look at the British Empire and say, I'm going to challenge them militarily. That would have been suicide. Instead, he used the fact that they were an overwhelmingly well-armed, powerful opponent, and sort of accentuated his strategy of passive nonviolent resistance is actually, if you think about it, a brilliant play that uses the strength of the British Empire against itself. So the key is that you don't tackle things head on. You think about your problems and you go, what's a way that I could bypass this problem altogether? So what the extras we have here, imagine you're a small startup cafe competing with Starbucks. How do you beat them? Well, it's certainly not by opening more retail stores than them.
It's try to brute force.
Right. It's not beating them on price. It's what can't they do as a huge company that you can do as a small company, and leaning into your advantages and bypassing their strengths. And that's how little beats big. Yeah.
Brainstorm 3 ideas for that. I give you guys one example. A couple of years ago, I was driving on I-5, the highway, and I took an exit, and there were signs for Exxon and Shell and big brand gas stations, make a right for Exxon, and Shell, and there was a local gas station with not a known brand name, had a sign, I think on cardboard, that said, great gas with really clean bathrooms left.
Sure.
And guess what? A lot of people would just say, oh, clean bathrooms. And they go, that is an example of a situation that, a local business said, okay, so people come, take the exit on the highway. What else do they need in addition to gas? Clean bathrooms.
Everyone else is competing on the price of gas.
Brand and, brand recognition and all that. They're like, no, we have really clean bathrooms. And that's one way of, that you cannot compete with Shell and Exxon head on brand recognition and price. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is the last one. Yeah. So the last one is what we mentioned earlier, this idea of amor fati, a love of fate. And the story I tell is a story of Thomas Edison. He's an old man. He's got this factory in New Jersey, sort of laboratory, and it catches on fire one day while he's having dinner with his family. And he comes to the scene, and his son is standing there. They're watching their life's work go up in flames. And it's this weird fire because he stores all these chemicals in the buildings. It's all these different colors. And Edison, he grabs his son and he says, go get your mother. She'll never see a fire like this again. And it's this, it seems insane, and he hadn't actually lost it, but what he's illustrating there is this Stoic idea of like, hey, my life's work might be going up in flames, but I'm going to find some way to enjoy this, right? I'm going to embrace what happened. And he tells a reporter the next day, you know, actually, I've been through stuff like this before. It energizes you. It gives you purpose. And he rebuilds the factory. He actually takes $1 million loan from Henry Ford to be able to fund this. And he's back up and running just a few weeks later. And so it's this idea of, I'm going to embrace the things that happen to me. It's not only, hey, I'm going to accept them and I'm not going to complain about them, but let's take it a step further. I'm going to like see them as a good. You know, when you're religious, there's an advantage in the sense you can be like, oh, this is God's will. God chose me for this. He's teaching me something. Right. Well, you know, whether you're religious or not, you can still have that same idea. It's like, whatever happens is for the best. And I'm grateful that it happened, and I'm going to embrace it. And so, look, we don't always, the exercise here is sort of writing down, look, I don't always control what happens to me, but I control how I feel about it. And so let's list some situations and then say, how can I feel good about this happening? Right? You know, how can I, like, I think the example we have here is like, you're writing a novel and your computer eats it. It just disappears.
Has it happened to you?
I've lost considerable amounts of my writing, and you know, you can quit and you can say, well, I'm done, if that no one wanted me to write that, or you can say, now I get to start over, and it's like, it'll come easier for me this time. Because I've done it before, and it'll actually be better the second time than when I did the first time. So it's going to feel really different, and it's going to feel like you're a crazy person, but that's how you can bounce back from these things that would, you know, basically kill anyone else.
Yep, that's actually a good one. So with that, I mean, there are more exercises in the booklet, and I hope you guys go through all of them. So Ryan, what did you learn after writing the book? What are the things that you wish you had included in the book?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so the book is all about how we deal with sort of external obstacles. The book I wrote after it is called Ego is the Enemy, and it was sort of about how oftentimes the main obstacle we face is like ourselves, right? How
it's internal.
Yeah, it's like we think like, oh, these people are that success is hard and that it's way out there and there's all these things I have to do. And in reality, most of what holds us back from success is like our own attitudes, our own sense of grandiosity, our own selfishness, having bad goals, whatever. So I think I would have maybe talked a little bit more about how we're our own obstacle.
Internally.
Yeah, because it's like external obstacles, the nice part about them is they're inanimate, right? Whereas like our own demons, they're constantly moving and changing and making things harder, and sometimes we don't even know that they're there.
So if you could add it, what would you have said about people, about that particular?
I think I just would have talked about the way that oftentimes our own sort of entitlements, for example, like thinking things should be a certain way, or that, hey, if I do all these things, I'll have earned this good thing, that our expectations and entitlements set us up to feel like we've been screwed over or hurt in a way that maybe we haven't.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so what are you going to write about next?
So I wrote another book about Stoicism called The Daily Stoic.
Yes.
I'm really into sort of daily practice right now. Like, what do I do every day? Like, I'm going to read this page every morning. I'm going to write in a journal about it. So I'm into that, and I think my next book is, what's been interesting about these books that I've written is they've sold really well, but you wouldn't know that necessarily from like the bestseller list. They sell by word of mouth, and I find that most successful products do that, right?
Yeah,
it's like
that's right.
Like if you're in the movie business, everyone's checking the box office, but really what matters is like, are people going to be watching this on TV 20 years from now? Yeah. And so I think, you know, it's so easy with the internet to go like, is this a trending topic on Twitter? How many Facebook shares did it get? And like, what's so interesting about MentorBox as a business, for instance, is like, it doesn't matter. All the people that don't use it, they don't matter.
Right.
What just matters that every month there's customers, right? And so I'm sort of looking at some of those like unsexy perennial businesses.
Yeah, and one thing that is interesting, I mean, you mentioned, you know, things that you can do every day, like habits, and one of the things I tell people is that, trust me, nobody who becomes good at something just becomes good at something by accident or because they're genetically good at it. It's, there's some genetic disposition.
Sure.
There's some luck involved, environment and all that, but people who are good at things, they become good at that by finding a system and going, like, basically systematically going through and figuring out the method to the madness and going at it a little bit at a time.
Yes.
So
I think Tim Ferriss has talked about this. He's like, what you want to do is study the people who shouldn't be able to do what they do because clearly they figured it. It's like you want to look at the basketball player who's too short to play in the NBA, or the football player who's not big enough. What did they figure out? What hacks or tricks did they come up with that allows them to do what other people are not able to do? And I found this when I trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a little while, is like, actually the really big guys have the worst skills because they can just lay on, like, in some ways having those advantages makes you not develop the fundamental skills that you need. So, for the perennial theme here is how do we find opportunities inside an obstacle. It's like when you're disadvantaged, you're going through something, or maybe you wish that you had this or that. In fact, it's a benefit because now you're going to get better at the fundamentals. Whereas if you didn't, you would have just taken them for granted.
Yeah, and one of the things we try to do at MentorBox is to actually give people that exact like 10 minutes a day set aside and just go through 1 or 2 exercises. It's like a thing that you do, and over time you become good at it, and you wouldn't even realize it's just so gradual and it builds up.
Like I was resentful as a kid, like in my teenage years, and my parents didn't like teach me all this stuff. And so I had to read all these books.
Right.
But that changed my life. You know what I mean? Like if they taught me a little bit more, maybe I would have been hungry enough to learn those things, and then it would have changed the whole course of my life.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, one thing I recommend is that you watch these videos 2 or 3 times even, because repetition helps, and go through the booklet. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.